Hey guys, it's Quana back again for another recap of The Handmaid's Tale. Well, here we're going to talk really quickly about episode 3. Kind of a recap, kind of just a review. Hopefully you had a chance to see the episode. If you have, please get into the comments. Let me know what you thought about it. If you haven't and you want to not be spoiled, save this video, come back to it later. I promise it will be worth your while. I'm going to try to keep this short and sweet as we talk about episode 3 entitled Devotion. This episode, of course, we know that June from the last episode was headed back into Gilead to try to rescue Luke and Moira from what is sure to be, death, mayhem, destruction, who knows what else, as they've gotten lost and entangled in no man's land. She meets up with Mark, who basically informs her that, the best way for her to do this is to get in touch with Nick again. So once again, she will be reunited with her baby daddy, and he will have to show up and help her to save the day. And this is why Luke and Moira needed to stay their behinds at home. They are not built for this. And Moira ought to know better. She was traveling into Chicago, saving people all the time when she was dating old girl, Tom Hiddleston's wife, Zawe. I can't think of her name on the show right now. It began with an O. But she was dating her back a season ago, maybe even 2 seasons ago. And she's gotten sloppy. Not only that, but I just think that it was really naive of her to think that she could go into this mission and with little planning, and with someone like Luke, who has very little experience dealing with any of this. And I know that he is really on this mission to kind of save his daughter, but I'm going to be honest with you, though I do adore Luke and I want June to end up with Luke, I think that Luke is really doing this because his manhood is threatened. And this is a real problem that we have to deal with. This idea of masculinity fronting as a facade, needing to protect June from the choices that she's made or protect her from Gilead. And I commend him for wanting to save his daughter, but he is doing about this in about the worst possible way because he's not being strategic. Anyhow, forget about them, because now we are back in New Bethlehem, and guess who's here? Serena, the woman who built Gilead. And as you can see from the thumbnail, I was thinking of We Built This City. She built this city. Yes, Lawrence might have built New Bethlehem, but this is all riding on the coattails of Serena and her ability to be able to sell this to the other countries who are wanting and waiting to get rid of their refugees. Sounds very familiar. I think we're going to be getting a time like this very, very soon. I really don't know what Serena Joy thinks that she's going to get out of this. I think that she wants to make Gilead work so much because she feels as though this is the only way she can atone for the horror and the damage that is caused. But I don't think that she's really face the horror and the damage that this has caused. I don't think she's really contented with seeing handmaids with their mouths stapled shut, or women who've had their genitalia mutilated, or people who've literally been killed and strung up on the wall. And she does this out of some biblical belief that this is what God wills. And I'm just thinking to myself, the type of torture that these people have been subjected to, not just death and killing and just quick shot to the head, but literal torture, and you think that this is okay, you're gonna have to contend with this, and nothing that you do is going to erase the guilt that you should be feeling and ought to be. And then of course in this episode we get Aunt Lydia, who is on the search for Janine and finds her in a most disturbing place, Jezebel's. That's right. Janine is back and she is a Jezebel. It was already very heartbreaking that when the bomb hit Chicago, June and Janine were separated and she wasn't able to be rescued by Moira and the others. There was no way that she was going to make it into Canada at that point because, listen, they really made June a whole stowaway. But to top that off, the idea that she was sent back to Gilead and then as punishment eventually ends up in Jezebel's is all the more heartbreaking. She's not with her daughter. She's not, I don't know that, and it really sets up this dilemma, this question that really have been contending with June and Moira, and now with Janine, is there is really no comparison. One person's torture and just the trauma that they've gone through isn't necessarily worse than another's or easier to deal with than another's, but it's certainly, we don't want to be playing trauma Olympics with anyone. But this is kind of a new level where she might have some facade of freedom because there's certain things that the Jezebels are allowed to do, drink and smoke and things like that. Those things are really just opioids to help them pass the time and to forget their situations, because these commanders are basically allowed to beat on them and hit them, and in much worse ways than they were able to do when they were just handmaids, expected to birth babies. But then you have the added layer of, well, the handmaids have their babies stripped. It's really just a sad cycle, and I hope, if nothing else, that Janine doesn't get stuck in Gilead at the end of all of this. If there's one person to make it out, I really do want it to be Janine, because she hasn't had her taste of freedom yet, and she is most deserving of it. As you can imagine, she's got some strong words for Lydia when she finally sees her. Like, you think that you're better than this? You're not. You did this to us too. You treated all of us like we were your girls, and yet you tortured us and abused us and beat us and knew that we were getting raped. So really, what's your part to play in this? With Lydia and with Serena, they keep tiptoeing right to the edge of like taking some accountability, and then right as that toe goes into the icy cold water of accountability, they pull it right back. And so Aunt Lydia, of course, goes to Lawrence to try to appeal for him to help. And of course, Mrs. Lawrence is not having any of that. She's done with Janine. Janine tried to steal her baby. She slept with a man, got her husband killed, all kinds of things. She is not trying to deal with Janine anymore. And so, of course, Aunt Lydia then goes to plead to Serena to see what can be done to help Janine. Now, back with June, who's now met up with Nick at this abandoned amusement park where they believe they will find Moira and Luke, and eventually they do, but not before they are spotted by two guardians. And it looks like there's going to be a situation that they're not going to be able to get out of. But Nick does what Nick does best, and he takes them out and saves the day for his beloved, and she's able to ride off into the sunset with her husband and leaving her baby daddy behind. So the devotion in this episode's title, right? Nick's devotion to June, June's devotion to Luke because he waited for her, Lydia's devotion to Janine, Serena's devotion to Gilead. And then, of course, at the very end of the episode, we have Commander Wharton, of course, we know is Nick's daddy-in-law. He seems to be highly interested in our Serena Joy. And as I've said before, I don't want her to get a happy end. And the show is doing some very interesting things by giving her this romantic love interest and having these little sweet moments that I'm just like, I'm not liking this. Get me off this ride. But the question of devotion, like what are these people devoted to? The causes that they're devoted to. The fact that Lawrence was basically able to say, like, I don't believe in God, and just really like flabbergast Serena, who is very devoted to whatever bizarre ideals of God she has in her head, is so very telling. And so, question of the day, what are you devoted to? Let me know in the comments, and let me know whose devotion do you most sympathize with and why. I don't normally feel sad for Nick because he did make his bed and he has to lie in it, but I do feel a little sad for Nick as he watches June drive off into the sunset with her husband. And of course, like, he faces threats by Mark Tuello to expose him, which really, Mark, nobody believes you. You're not big and bad. You're not that one. So sit down and sit yourself down somewhere, sir. A decent episode, but it's very slow paced, especially considering we only have this season left. I would rather go ahead and get into some meatier stuff and have maybe, if necessary, another time jump. But we do have another episode coming up, episode 4, and we're going to see what happens with Janine, what happens with Lydia, what happens with Serena, and yeah, it was a decent episode. I would say I would give this one a 7.5 out of 10. But let me know your thoughts about episode 3 in the comments below, and I will see you guys in the next video. Toodles.